The state of California real estate. We're talking about that and much more here on the Commercial Real Estate Report. I'm your host, Chris Berg, head of business development for Abernathy Holdings. We build Class A self-storage sites in California and Arizona. Very excited to introduce you to our guest today. 2020, he was the top lawyer in land use and zoning law. He's a partner now at Jeffer, Mangles, Butler, and Mitchell, also the chairman of their government land use, environment, and energy department, Mr. Ben Reznik. Ben, thanks so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
A pleasure, Chris.
I'm looking forward to this conversation. There's a lot of topics I want to get into with you. We're talking how you'd been in LA since you were 10, and I'm really curious why and what was the impetus for you to choose land use and zoning law?
I think, I don't know. I think with many lawyers, what happens is we go through law school thinking one thing, and then we get on a job and we get handed something, and all of a sudden we say, oh, we're the expert now. And we decide to do it. So I went locally to school, the UCLA undergrad, USC law school. And I was very entrepreneurial, and I immediately opened up my own practice in Beverly Hills after graduating USC law school. And I didn't know what I wanted to do, Chris. So I tried everything. I did a little of everything because I said, I need to touch all the bases and kind of see where I want to settle. So I'd say about 3, 4, or 5 years into this, I started getting into some real estate matters, and my friends, and I was always political, and I had already been very involved with Xavier Oslovsky's campaign. Those may or may not remember him. He was a city councilman and an underdog, and then all of a sudden my friends are working at City Hall, and then one thing led to another, and I had an issue with the property, and they said, well, this is what you got to do to change the zone. And this is like 1978, 79. At that time, zoning was handled by architects and engineers. There were no lawyers.
Really?
Yes, because there were no really legal impediments. If you met the plan designation and you met the zoning, I mean, it was just kind of standard operating procedure. But then, so I got involved with a couple of zone changes on properties that I actually was owned and in a partnership. And then the homeowners movement of no growth hit, because there was so much growth going on at the end of the 1970s that by 1980, you had a lot of homeowner groups fighting development. And there I was already, a lawyer doing some land use. And then I get a calls from people who say, oh, so-and-so at City Hall said to call you because somebody's fighting my project and I can't, and that's how I got into it. And of course, what made it exciting is that it combines the law, it combines public policy, it gets you out of the office, you're out in the community, you're at City Hall, you're at a lot of contentious meetings, or you're at people's homes with coffee clutches and, trying to explain the project and work with them and negotiate. And so I built sort of a career doing that initially, and that ended up ultimately being the focus of my practice. And I've been now practicing for over 45 years. So I have done probably more land use work, I don't know, than anybody can think of. But the interesting part of that is that as new laws came into being, I mean, the concept of CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, that came into full fruition. The Coastal Act came into fruition while I was already involved. So more and more impediments were thrown, more regulatory impediments, which gave me more of an opportunity to try to help people get through and ultimately also litigate, because when projects would get denied, we'd go to court. And that was a deciding factor in my career, because people would oftentimes see me as a lobbyist in the LA area. And LA Times would write about me as a lobbyist, and there are stories about it. But I sued the city. And that's what confused a lot of people, is if you're a lobbyist, you don't make an enemy of the people who feed you. So, but I felt that I was a lawyer first, not a lobbyist. If somebody's hiring me They're hiring me because I'm a lawyer to fight for their project. And so that was the kind of practice I insisted on and maintained over the years, and hired people who wanted to do the same thing. And some 26 years ago, I merged my practice, which was a small law firm boutique, into Jeffer Mangels. So Jeffer Mangels, Butler and Mitchell is only the second law firm I've ever worked in. The first was my own, and then Jeffer. And we've had a great run there because we're now statewide. We have a San Francisco office, in LA and Orange County. And at one point, a few years back before the big recession, I probably had the largest dedicated department of land use lawyers in the state. I have 25 lawyers doing nothing but land use work up and down the state. We trimmed that after the big recession, but we still have a very large group of people dedicated to doing this. So that's how I got into it.
Man, so thank you for sharing that story. I am so grateful to have you on the show today. We're going to have many discussions, I get the sense, in the future, but I want to get your take on this because I want to share with you. I just got back here 9 months ago from North Dakota. And when I started telling people that I was coming back to California to do real estate, they literally, Ben, would laugh at me. They'd say, "Are you crazy? It's so hard to do anything in that state, the entitlements." So I'm curious, what have been some of the biggest changes you've seen over your 45-year career? And where do you feel that we could start to maybe get rid of some of these challenges, ordinances, laws that could just make it just a little bit more welcoming to developers?
Well, first of all, the people in North Dakota were right who told you all of that. Let's start with that. California has always been a very difficult state to develop in because of the regulatory environment. So we've always had a lot of regulations to overcome, and both at the statewide and local level. Over the years, we would spend a lot of time meeting with neighbors, talking to folks, trying to get projects in. But as the projects got bigger and bigger, it got a little bit more and more difficult. You had bigger impacts and ramifications. You just have to go through the process. The barrier to entry for a developer in California is high, but the payoff was also very high, which is why people still wanted to develop in California, right? Where the population grew, the economy was great. Look, California's got, what is it, the 9th largest economy in the world. So it's a big sandbox to play in. So we did work a lot, but to answer your question as to whether there's been a change recently, there has been in the housing sector, not so much in commercial. So as more and more cities over the last many years denied housing projects and denied, especially those with affordability components, because neighbors just didn't want to see more density. Then even though the state had passed the density bonus law, or they had passed other laws requiring or allowing for housing, jurisdictions always had a way out, and they would say, "Oh, we have a height limit, you're exceeding it," or "We have floor area ratio, you're exceeding it," or "You need a setback," or "You need parking," etc. And so they'd always have a way out. So in the last several years, the newer elected legislators that went up to Sacramento got tired of this, and they started passing a series of laws. The Housing Accountability Act and all the amendments to it, and various other laws that basically forced the housing on the local jurisdictions. And so a lot of the local jurisdictions have been fighting it and saying, "Hey, we want to maintain local control." State legislature and the governor and the attorney general, who's out there slamming a lot of these cities, saying, "No, because you haven't been doing it and you've been denying these projects, so we're going to force you to have to approve them." So that's helped us with housing projects. We're just, starting to see the fruits of that as we go through the administrative hearing processes and going into court in some of these to use these new laws to effectuate the approvals. We've had a lot of good success in getting projects approved, and or finally, or if they were denied, going to court and getting a judge to reverse it and saying, "No, city, you can't do that, fix it." So that's it. But on the commercial sector, that's not the same. it's commercial laws. You don't have the incentives or the mandates to force that on cities, whereas you do with the housing.
Do you think the local ordinances are starting to understand, like, look, we've had pretty much a mass exodus out of California over the past several years? Are they starting to realize, like, hey, we need to do something to make it more affordable to live here, or are they still kind of tone deaf to that?
Yeah, they speak to it, but when it comes to actually implementing, I think tone deaf is probably a good way of saying it. And look, if a group of neighbors just don't want to see something on their block or around the corner, and they're going to fight against it, the leadership sometimes of elected local council people are not necessarily as strong to be able to stand up to them. So we still see that. I still have numerous cases where we're going to court to try to implement these new laws passed by the state. But there are a few elected officials who see the benefit of more housing. But overall, everyone talks about it, but not everyone implements it. Look, just about 3 years ago, I had a project in the coastal zone down in Marina Del Rey area, actually in the Del Rey area of LA, a block from the ocean. We were going to put up 72 units and 11% affordable. That's 8 units. May not sound like but it's only one project. And it got denied. It was approved by the planners, approved by the planning commission. But the local councilman, who was very liberal, this had nothing to do with it, a liberal, progressive kind of person, always said pro-housing, succumbed to the pressures of some people who were saying, oh, we don't want this big building right here in the middle of Del Rey. And so we said, big building, it's no bigger than any other building. But he got the city council to deny it. And the city council unanimously just agreed to deny that project, which is a shame. But, a lot of those council members who voted against it were always stating that they're in support of housing, particularly affordable housing. And so the city, has not approved affordable housing in over 15 years within the coastal zone. So that's where it is. So I hope I answered your question.
You bring up a really good point, because we all know the value of coastal properties, right? How much of that is, and maybe you don't want to go there, but these council people getting their pockets lined by wealthy donors and ensuring, hey, as long as you keep, not in my backyard alive and keep these projects out of my backyard, I'll keep feeding your campaigns.
Yeah, I don't think Chris, in this instance, I don't think that's the impediment necessarily. The coastal zone is obviously guarded closely by the Coastal Commission in California, which is a very kind of unique commission to have. It's a state commission. It does have oversight, if you will, over development. And remember, the state coastline is 1,100 miles long. So you got one commission that has jurisdiction over that much land. And they have a very wishy-washy kind of standard they can deny you a project on. And that standard is compatibility. Oh, is this project compatible with the surrounding area? And there's no definition of what's compatible. And so if they decide, no, it's not compatible, they'll ding you. And so we haven't been able to force housing into the coastal zone. What it's going to take is the state legislature, again, taking these laws that they have been passing and applying them to the coastal zone. They haven't done that yet. And we'll see if that happens this year or next year.
And when was the Coastal Commission instituted?
Coastal Commission came into effect back in the 70s, the 1970s, when there was an initiative in California to protect the coastline. That ended up creating the Coastal Commission. And over the years, the Coastal Commission became more and more powerful over what can and cannot get developed. People can give you nightmare stories about trying to get something through the Coastal Commission or built through there. So there are lobbyists who specialize in nothing but the Coastal Commission.
It's a very valuable 1,100-mile piece of dirt, right? I mean, that's incredible. So.
Yeah, and sometimes their jurisdiction, they claim, goes inland at least 3+ miles. So you're not necessarily always sitting on the coast.
One of the things I'd love to hear from you, again, because of your experience, and we're talking to brokers and developers right now, what would be some of the top zoning secrets that you would want to share with people that they're go, hey, gosh, it's really tough to get stuff zoned here. But boy, if you just did these things, that would make a big impact for you. Like, what would you suggest?
Yes. Look, traditionally, we would always suggest reach out to the neighbors, let them know what's going on, try to get them on board. Because if you can get supporters on board and minimize the opposition, then the local elected official, whether it's a councilman, a supervisor, whatever position who has the authority over the development, is not likely to oppose you. Having said that, it's not always easy to get that community support on board. So if you cannot get the community support, which is oftentimes the case, we try to help a developer go through a process in anticipation of things going wrong, so that if there's a need to go to court to enforce your rights, we've created an administrative record and a record that a judge can relate to and rule on. So we advise the clients on what needs to be in the application, what they've got to include. Oftentimes they'll want to take a shortcut on environmental review and not do let's say a full study, and oftentimes that's short-sighted because if you end up taking a shortcut, it's easier for opponents to set it aside in court later. Whereas if you do, let's say, a full EIR, it's harder to set that aside. But yes, you're spending more time and money doing the EIR. So depending on the size of the project, what's at stake and what's involved. And so it is, there is an approach, and short of, just having the influence over the local city councilman to absolutely guarantee assurance. I've not seen that, by the way. It's interesting. I don't think any lobbyist, lawyer, anybody at this day and age has that much influence over any one member. It's certainly not in LA, in the small cities that we deal with all around LA, all Southern California. I'd say just you have to plan thoughtfully for your entitlement project, and just tee it up so that if you get dinged at the end, you've got at least the case to take to court. One of the things people don't understand in this kind of litigation is once you're going to court, you cannot bring in new evidence, no witnesses. The judge is only looking at everything that was done below in the administrative hearings. So everything you submit in the administrative hearings, all the legal arguments, all the factual data, everything has to be in. So that's the key. That's part of what we get asked to do all the time.
So it sounds like one of the first steps is obviously to get the community, the neighborhood to buy in. So am I holding like barbecues at the local high school, or what's my strategy here to get the community to buy in?
People used to do that. I used to do coffee clutches. I'd ask some neighbor to put together some stuff. Right now, there are firms that specialize in outreach. So they'll go around and canvass, just like polling is done. They'll go knock on doors. They'll go, try to sell the project to people. More so doing it that way. As far as community meetings, they tend to be in sort of homeowner association meetings, where you present, or neighborhood councils. The city of LA has a whole system of neighborhood councils. And that's where you go if you're going to make a broader presentation. But it's a lot of legwork, and you have to be patient and be willing to do that if you think you can get some support.
From a broker's perspective, how much success do you see if, for example, I go to a city and I like a piece of dirt, and I go to them and I say, hey, I've got some people that like to buy this piece of dirt, but what do you want here? Is there some value in trying to reverse engineer what the city wants, and I go find those people to go buy that dirt? Or,
Chris, that's a great point. I actually tell people to do that, what you just said. It's like, go talk to the ultimate decision maker, which is going to be an elected official, a councilman. Because in the state of California, the way land use and zoning is worked and structured, ultimately all appeals go to the city council, the legislative body. All appeals of environmental documents, mitigated negative decks or neg decks or exemptions or EIRs, you have a right to appeal to the legislative body. So absolutely, I would tell someone, let's go and see what they think ought to be built here. Get a buy-in, get some support. That would be great. Those situations I do recommend all the time if someone's doing that. We get that. That's a lot. We get a lot of those calls. We call them the quick due diligence. Here's the address. Here's the property. We quickly look it up. We look at the issues. We look at the history. We look at the zoning, the general plan, etc., and give somebody sort of a 30,000-foot view of, all right, look, you want to do this mixed use or this commercial. Here are your challenges, but it's doable. Here's what you got to do. But I like the idea always of going in early to the city council or the board of supervisors, whoever it is going to make the decision.
And then you got to worry about elections because if that person's no longer on there, there's all those variables, right?
Those variables. That's right. They look, it's politics. And that's what I'm saying. It's part of the game, right? And it's part of what's involved. And at some point, if they don't approve you and you think you have a legal right under all these new state mandates in the housing sector, not the commercial, in the housing, then for sure, then we'll take him on. We have sued, the city in LA, the county, other cities, surroundings, trying to say, hey, this was wrongly denied. One of the cases we did actually out in Simi Valley, we had a assisted living facility and got denied on a conditional use. We took it to court arguing that is a housing project, and therefore, and the city said, no, it's not. And we had that whole battle. They said it's assisted living institutional. We said, yeah, it's still housing. And the judge agreed with us ultimately after a lot of briefing and argument, and then the city settled. And we got our project approved. We got our legal fees, a lot of them, but paid by the city. They didn't want to go through that. So it's interesting. It's in the world of housing. And I know commercial real estate is your thing, but there are a lot of office buildings right now that are sitting empty, and people are looking to convert them to some sort of residential use.
Do you think that's a viable option? I mean, you look at how do you take plumbing on one corner of a building and try to, implement it throughout an entire, do you think that's a viable option?
It is. And the reason is that what you're pointing to is solvable. It's physical. And if you need permits, you get, and that's ministerial permits, not discretionary. The use can be done. The driving force right now, certainly in California, is look, other than Century City, let's say, where we have a very low vacancy, everybody's hurting when it comes to office space right now. I mean, the statistics are, I wrote them down here, a couple of them there. We have somebody reported 44% of office properties nationwide are underwater, under loans, right? We've got in the LA area, I can tell you, we have a lot of clients in deep troubles on these office buildings. So you can either turn them back to the lender, you're not going to put more money into it, or try to do something else with it. So there are efforts. And there, by the way, there's a state law that also just was passed this past year to try to make it easier to convert commercial space into residential. So it makes it a little easier, takes away some of the local limitations, like, oh, you need a side yard setback if it's residential. And so it takes those things away. And because cities have a mandate now to provide housing, and they have to meet those regional housing numbers, they can point to the commercial sites that are empty and in their report to the state say, well, somebody could build units here. So they get credit for that. And if they want to do that, I mean, Beverly Hills tried to do that now, and it's been in the news a lot lately because they got some developers suing the city or going after the city for what's called builder's remedy. That means the city of Beverly Hills, its housing element, which is part of the general plan, is non-compliant, meaning it's not meeting the regional needs allocated to it. The state housing department says you're not in compliance. City of Beverly Hills, why are they not in compliance? City of Beverly Hills submitted its report saying, well, all these commercial buildings here can be residential. So technically, we cover all the amount of housing we are obligated to. The state looked at it and said, no, these buildings are occupied. No one's changing these buildings into residential anytime soon. Who are you fooling? And said, no, denied. So you're out of compliance. So I don't know if you saw recently in the news, a judge slammed the city with a moratorium saying you cannot issue any more building permits until you solve it.
So again, coming from North Dakota, maybe I'm just being ignorant, but what am I missing? Because there's such a problem here. Why wouldn't Beverly Hills just want to be transparent with the state and try to fix this problem rather than give them maybe not so accurate numbers? What am I not understanding?
Well, because A, they're resisting the numbers that have been allocated to them, so they don't want to have to provide a few thousand housing units. B, they're having a difficult time. It would mean they would have to upzone certain areas of their city to allow for that housing. They're avoiding that. They don't want to have to do that. So their plan was to try to piece together a program like that.
Going to devalue the rest of the land in the city, or like, why wouldn't they want to? Oh, did we lose you, Ben? Can you still hear me? Ben? Hopefully Ben will come back on here. So we'll see if Ben can rejoin us in a moment. And
there? Sorry, I lost you.
So are they?
No. I don't think it's about devaluing. It's that they don't want that much more density. They don't want all those units or housing units.
Fascinating. All right, let's try to sort of combine here housing and commercial. And I want to talk about the ULA and this homeless situation. That's such a prominent conversation. Again, I want to be respectful of your time, Ben, so we just got a few minutes left. But
okay.
Some data on ULA and then just get your assessment. So pre-ULA, as you can see here, there were $2.4 billion in real estate transactions in Los Angeles. Post-ULA, in the second quarter, there was $260 million. And then Q3, 300 million. So it had a dramatic impact. And obviously, I would say the antithesis of what the people that put it on the ballot anticipated. Just your assessment of those numbers, and what do you see in the impact of the ULA in Los Angeles real estate?
Well, we know it substantially dropped afterwards, right? So there was a run-up, and our firm was in the middle of it because a lot of the clients said, "Hey, we got to get this property sold before." I think what was it? April deadline. April 2023 was the effective date, if I recall. So we had a lot of deals going through to try to do that. Here's the thing about this ULA tax. It was totally misrepresented to the voters. And I know that because some of the council people I've talked to who voted for it have now admitted it. One councilwoman who, was involved heavily in sponsoring it, et cetera, has publicly stated so, admitted it. Where was it misrepresented? Well, it was, a luxury tax on high-end homes, those big mansions. So it was like a mansionization tax. Nobody bothered to tell people it was going to tax every single property in the city. So whether it's an apartment building, whether it's an industrial building, whether it's an office building, everybody gets that hit with that unbelievable surcharge. So it gets passed. And now we're seeing all of a sudden the city thought it was going to get all this money, and it's getting a trickle of that money. The idea of that money was to go spend it on affordable housing. They're not getting that money. It's not coming in. Now, will that change over time as the market, settles and equalizes, and people start saying, all right, we'll pay these taxes, but we're still going to close deals with them? Maybe. But it has had definitely a big impact in this year. And so you take that combined with the rise in interest rates in 2023 from 3.5%, 3% to 7%, double interest rates, that double whammy. And, I asked one of my partners to give me his thought, one of my real estate transactional senior partners, and he'll give me a whole litany of issues and problems going today. So, you can't refinance today. unless you're going to put in more of your money in, because the rates are much higher, you're now in troubles. You don't want to, sell because you're going to have to drop your price substantially. And by the way, people looking to buy commercial assets or industrial or others, can't finance it at 7% necessarily, right? So you have that issue, and we are, and ironically, the high-end residential market, the actual mansions that were the targets, are dead. We're involved with so many of those deals, or either entitlements or transactions, selling, buying, and the market on that has for now collapsed. I mean, traditionally that market's been upheld obviously by people from out of town, very wealthy individuals buying these massive, large houses, and that right now is really, that is a pretty good word for it. I think maybe it'll come back.
But I want to back up to something you said. Before I do, look, I'm not a proponent of the ULA, and since you've got political chops, I think you and I can say this. I mean, you've got to give it credit to the other side, the way they branded as the mansion tax, right? I mean, that was a really good political slogan. So you got to, yeah. What I would love to have you circle back to, though, is you said there was I think this is pretty stunning, an actual council person that voted for it and is now going, wait a second, I didn't realize it was going to do X.
Well, I don't think she said, I didn't realize, but she said it wasn't sold that way. It wasn't promoted that way. And she sort of admitted that. And that's a fact, because, the whole campaign was like that.
You've got offices now across the state. I know this is being proposed down in San Diego. Are you hearing anything from people in San Diego? Do you think it goes down in San Diego? Does it pass?
That remains to be seen. I don't know. There are other kinds of taxes, by the way, being experimented with in different jurisdictions. I don't know if you saw this just this past.
We continue to lose Ben. So hopefully he will jump back in here. I know he wanted to
do this. I won't use my iPhone.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I can't hear you. Sorry.
Can you hear me now, Ben?
I don't know what I did wrong. Sorry.
No worries, Ben.
Anyways, in Hermosa Beach, they're passing a new kind of tax that they want to charge for those who are building market rate housing, charge them a certain fee per square foot so they can apply that to affordable housing. It's like taking money away from you. I think certain cities are going to struggle and keep trying to find ways to generate revenue to figure out how to subsidize affordable housing, short of just giving, people, a lot of density.
Can you hear me now, Ben?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
If you can get that fixed here in the next minute or so, great. If not, I know Ben wanted to keep it to about 30 minutes. And so we're beyond that and just wanted to, hopefully we can do this again and he can hear me in a moment, because great stories over a 45-year career. Can you hear me now, Ben?
I can't hear you at all. I don't know what happened.
No, we'll wrap it up there. But Ben, thank you for the time.
Something happened when I got that last phone call.
This is the Commercial Real Estate Report.
I'm glad you can hear me.
We will have you back, Ben, and thank you very, very much.